But the idea of thy will be done, and when we were talking about the peace pilgrim, right, and the thing that I read to you under relinquishments that she wrote in her book, she said the first thing that must be relinquished for peace is the relinquishment of personal will. That's the first thing that has to be relinquished for there to be peace. The second thing that falls out of that is the idea that you're a separate self, that you're separate. So the question then becomes, so she's not the first person, to bring that up and present that, nor is Ramesh Balsekar, by the way, the first person to bring this up, right? In fact, it goes really, the idea of no free will goes back in the Eastern teachings very deep, in the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, these stories that were told in the ancient cultures. The gist of the stories was to talk about the reality in which peace can exist, and that reality was a reality in which you understood that you have no free will. So the question for us, right? Is can not so much, obviously, everybody's attention gets pulled into what's happening in the world and all that stuff, and that's understandable, right? But here's a good question. Why is it that we pay so much attention to these things in the world when people are being murdered and bombs are going off, right? But we don't pay that same attention to our own inner experience, our own life in relationship to other people, that's just as much a war as that war. Huh? Isn't it true? It's just as much a war as that war. But we look at that and condemn it. We look at that and say, oh, that's terrible, that's horrible, right? But we don't pay much attention to our own individual lives in which you're driving your car and you're at war with the other cars on the road, aren't you? Isn't that the same thing, right? Or even with the people that you're close to, right? Your close relatives or your children, under the right conditions, you look at them as the enemy. You behave toward them as the enemy, And a lot of times that happens reactively, impulsively, meaning that there's not much consideration given at all. The right buttons get pushed and you punch. The right buttons get pushed and you start attacking, right? And many times you don't even come back to your senses until after the battle, right? And then you calm down and realize, what the hell did I just do, right? So that's the place for us to look, to really take the opportunity to look and see. I remember going to listen to the Dalai Lama talk about war at one of his talks that he gave in Rutgers 10, 15 years ago, right, about war. And what did he say? He said, the war that we must deal with before any other war is the war that exists in our minds, in our hearts, in our relationships with ourselves. You don't even have to go as far as to talk about the conflict that you have with other people, right? You have enough conflict going on with you. There's enough war between you and yourself before you even get involved with anybody else, right? Why is that the case? It's because you're split off from yourself. You're split off from yourself. And what Ramesh says about that and what the other people say about that, when you really get into understanding what it's all being talked about, right? How are you cut off from yourself? Well, when you consider yourself to be a separate self, when you consider yourself to be an identity, right? Then you cut yourself off from all divine understanding, right? You cut yourself off from all divine, all of the source of divinity, right? And you take on the role of God, don't you? Yeah, now you're going to figure it all out. You're going to decide what to do based on your own conditioning and your understanding of everything. And part of that is that you're an American or you're whatever you believe in religiously, right? And because of that, your conditioning is such that you should try and find an American way of dealing with this, right? Think about it from an American perspective, right? It takes some real maturity. It takes some real spiritual maturity not to get sucked into that. right? So that a spiritual awake person doesn't buy into the bullshit from anybody. Your country, their country, it doesn't matter, you know? A spiritually awake person sees that the tragedy of the whole thing is that we are all the same. There is no reality called your country and my country. There is no reality called your nationality and my nationality. That's all made up stuff. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as a separate self, right? So you could say, whether we're talking about your life, your human life, right? Or the world's life, or humanity's life, right? We could say that it's the same situation in both cases. The expression of what we call war in terms of one country at war with another, right, starts with the war of individual people. First, there has to be, you know, once there's a separate self, once you're experiencing reality as a one in which you're a separate self, you're separate from other people, you're different than them, you're separate from people who believe things that are different than you, and what you believe is right and what they believe is wrong, that just goes along with it, right? Because after all, the mechanisms that are running our body and our mind are survival-based, right? And so because they're survival-based, they will see our differences as a problem, right? They see diversity. It's interesting. We use the word diversity when we're talking about how we should get along with one another, right? And then the same people talk about, you know, the fact that I'm right and you're wrong, right? The same people. And then how do you expect to get along if I'm right and you're wrong, right? So you really have to start at home with this stuff. You really have to, if you want to understand peace, you have to understand it in your experience first. Then when you act, when you speak for peace and you act for peace, it'll be coming from a real place. It won't be coming from this, I should want peace. You know what I mean? I should want peace. And then I should want peace. I'm peaceful. I'm all for peace. And then I get in my car and somebody cuts me off and I want to kill him. But I'm all for peace, except for that guy. You see what I'm saying? This is why the practice of meditation has power, because what it does is it has you awaken, you see? It has you awaken to start noticing what's really happening. Yeah, so when I talk about it, I'm asking you to notice what's really happening. And what's really happening begins with you, begins with me, begins with whether we know what peace really is. Whether we know what peace really is. And what the teachers tell us, whether it's the Peace Pilgrim, whether it's Ramesh Balsekar, whether it's the Dalai Lama, right? They're all telling us the same thing. The same thing. I was looking at one of the documentaries about the Peace Pilgrim, and at one point in the documentary, they had the Dalai Lama holding up her book and saying that, you know, he read the book and everything. And what he commented on was very interesting about it all. He said, I don't know if people understand how hard what this woman did was. You know what I mean? I came here today to walk 2 miles, and I'm walking on that track thinking, this woman walked 50,000 miles? Are you kidding? I can't even comprehend that. You know what I mean? Can't even try walking a couple of miles, especially at our age. I think I can say that, yeah. You know, and then you'll realize what she did. How the hell did she do that?
No bed, no possession.
Nothing. But the key to it was, if you look, you know, because when I look at these things, I'm really looking to see what was it that shifted for her. Because she was a spiritual being. She wasn't a human being anymore. A human being couldn't do that. That's beyond what a human being can do, right? Not just the physical challenge of walking that long, right? But she left her family. She was alone. She had no connection to anybody. She was alone all the time, you know, all the time. So we don't even comprehend that. You can't even, I promise you can't even comprehend what she did. But what happened was, on that night that she was walking all night in the woods, right? When she came to the place of the clearing and looked up and was talking to God, she said, take me and use me. And then she said that what happened there was an epiphany, and what the epiphany was all of the barriers or limitations that could exist for her as a human being that would be in the way of her keeping her vow were removed. So all of the things that would have us stop were taken out of the picture for her. So she was free to keep her vow. She made a vow that she would wander as long as human beings were not able to experience and express peace in the world. And she knew what that meant. She knew that meant she was going to be walking the rest of her life, right? And yet that didn't matter to her. It didn't matter to her. So I think when things like that, whether we're talking about Gandhi, whether we're talking about the Peace Pilgrim, whether we're talking about the Dalai Lama, Jesus Christ, Martin Luther King, all of these things I think are presented to us for us to understand that this is the possibility. It doesn't mean that you and I have to go walk 50,000 miles, right? But it would be the same accomplishment. See, it would be the same accomplishment for you and I to exist in a fulfilling, peaceful life. It would be the same accomplishment as what occurred for her. Because what occurred for her that allowed that to happen, and what would have to occur for us to allow that to happen, right, is we would have to give up the constant idea that we had free will. We would have to give up the idea and accept that thy will be done. And it's one thing to talk about this, right? And as best as I can do to talk about this with you is ask you to give it enough serious consideration that you could at least get a glimpse of the possibility. To give it enough serious consideration so that you could at least get a glimpse of the possibility. So that at least you could understand what Balsakar was saying when he said that nobody can do anything to me and I can't do anything to anybody else. So if that's true, because he was saying that's true. He wasn't saying, oh, I have a neat way of, he wasn't saying, I came up with a neat way of dealing with everything, right? And if I try and act this way and be this way, I'll be peaceful. No, he wasn't saying that. He was saying it's actually the truth. And if it's true that our attachment to the idea that we have free will and the attachment to the idea that our pea-shooter brain is sufficient, right? Attachment to the idea that your pea-shooter brain is sufficient to bring you to a place of peace, to bring you to a place of workability in your life, right? As long as we're attached to that ridiculous idea, we have to suffer. We have to suffer. And it may be in the big picture, it may be from God's point of view, as long as these people are attached to this mistaken belief that they're separate from one another, and as long as these people are attached to this mistaken belief that they're separate from me, then they have to suffer until they wake up. That's all. It's in their hands. It's in their hands. And the interesting thing about it is that if you understand, and this is why I think it's very important to contemplate this whole business of no free will and thy will be done and destiny. I think it's important to contemplate those things, because if you contemplate those things, you can clear up the resistance you have about it. If you contemplate these things, you can clear up the resistance you have about it. Right? If you look at what the resistances are that you have about it, one of them that is a big resistance is you don't want to give up the idea that you can do anything about anything, right? You don't want to give that up. It seems to be in conflict in a sense, right? Because isn't it the case that when we're meeting here and I'm talking to you, the whole premise of this is that you can do something, isn't it? You can practice meditation, right? You can change, you can be happier, you can be more satisfied, right? You can have peace, right? So it seems like, how do I process that? It seems to be such a paradox, such a contradiction, right? And the thing that people don't want to give up the most is the idea that you can do something. Why? Because that's the essence of your conditioning, isn't it? The reason you don't want to give that up is because you don't know who to be. You don't know who to be. You don't know how to be. You don't know what to do if you give that up, because that's your whole conditioning, right? Well, the thing is this, the key to it, and if you contemplate this and you can see what I'm about to say, you can realize that you don't have to worry about that one, right? Because thy will be done includes you changing. It doesn't exclude anything. Thy will be done means that what's happening right now, whether we're talking about the war in the world or the war in your world, right? Well, either one, what we're talking about, the war in the world or the war in your world, it looks like if I let go and have thy will be done, right, I'm accepting the war, right? That's the way it seems. I'm accepting the war. I can't accept the war, right? Well, that's not the case. Thy will be done includes not accepting the war, right? But you don't hear it that way. You think that it means that you can't do anything. No, but thy will be done includes that you can do something, right? That's about as paradoxical as it can get, right? Yeah.
Suppose you take like a Buddhist approach to this, the war in Ukraine, and look at it as a loving kindness meditation, that I give peace and loving kindness to the people of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, I want Putin dead, I want Putin murder. Mm-hmm. Suppose you look at it as a positive thing to say that I give loving kindness to those people in Ukraine. Ukraine, you could use it at this point.
That's better than hating people, right? But it's nowhere near as true or powerful as it would be if that expression was coming from the fact that you had found peace in your personal life first. See what I'm saying? Then it's an expression. It's not a good idea. You're not practicing, a morally right thing, right? No, you're expressing yourself when you say peace, when you express peace, right? Don't forget the definition, because the definition is the definition of the truth. It's the definition of a reality, right? And the definition is, if what you say is true, that we all have moments of peace, right? The only way that could be possible is if there are moments when we let go and accept God's will, even though we may not notice we're doing it. And therefore there might be peace, right? The idea. Even if you look at things like this way, and this is one of the reasons why I think that before you take your last breath, you'll be enlightened. Before you take your last breath, you'll have the peace that passes understanding, right? Why? Because you'll get to a place where you realize it's hopeless. You'll get to a place where you realize there's nothing I can do. Nothing. And there's something about that provides a tremendous sense of relief, right? There's something about the letting go that occurs when you realize that there is nothing you can do. You don't even have a choice about letting go. See, when you're dying, you don't even have a choice about letting go. Letting go is happening to you when you die. Letting go is happening to you. As that happens, you experience the peace, right? Because when that happens, you're getting into alignment with the true source. You're giving up your position. When you die, you're giving up your position. When the body dies, you're giving up your... But it's not just the body dying for most people, it's the person dying, right? And so they let go because you have no choice. You can't hold on. No matter what you do, you can't hold on. Right? And so before you die, you get a glimpse of the truth. You get a glimpse of the way it really is. That peace is readily available to you at all times. All you have to do is give up your good ideas about everything. All you have to do is give up the idea that you're in control, that you're doing this. And then see, that's the other thing that the Peace Pilgrim said that caught my attention. She said, peace is not a new concept. It's been around a long time, right? In fact, in our lifetimes, it was popularized more than probably ever in the past as a concept, right? Think about the Vietnam War. The peace movement was a pretty powerful movement at that time, right? But the thing she said is that it's not going to work as a concept. That's why it didn't work then. It's only going to work if it's understood for what it really is. It's not going to work as a concept. The only way it's going to work is if it's experiential, is if it's coming from the actuality of peace, not a good idea about peace. And the actuality of peace can only be understood and expressed and experienced if it is something that is happening for you personally. And then again, the irony and the paradox of it is that the only way it can happen for you personally is if you stop taking everything so personal. You see, the thing is, this is what's so difficult. The conditioning is so thorough, right, that it'll use your mouth and you won't even notice it, right? And it's not as simple as isolate somebody when they have the ability to destroy the planet. Do you know what I mean? No war can happen that can't be won. That's not a war anymore. That's suicide, right? No war, it's not a war when a war can't be won. It's suicide, right? So that's out of the question, right? But because it's out of the question, the creative use of strategy in conventional warfare is even more important. How much can we blow up without using the nuclear bombs? And that's where we're at. That's where we're at, because we haven't yet matured enough as a human species, right, to understand the very simple fact that we are interdependent. We haven't matured enough as a species to understand the simple fact that we're interdependent. Until it is understood and seen the way it is for anybody that's awake, anybody that's enlightened, anybody that is seeing things as they are, anybody that's seeing things as they are realizes that there's no such thing as a you or me. There's no such thing as that you're different than I am. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as there's, one country is separate and different from another country. There's no such thing. They actually don't exist. They don't exist. So you have to be involved in maintaining an illusion of separateness. You have to be involved in maintaining that illusion for you as a person, right? And you have to be involved in maintaining that illusion for other people and for the rest of the planet. One of the reasons that I think astronauts cried when they look back at the planet, because they're seeing the truth. There are no countries. Do you understand? That's got to have a big impact on you when you look back at the planet and you realize, wait a minute, there are no countries, right? That's the truth. There are no countries. There are no different people, because you're still invested in the wars you're involved in your own life. That's why. You're still invested. So you want to look good, you want to believe in something that's good like peace, right? You want to look good, but you really don't understand it. Most people really don't understand what peace is, right? They think of it as a good idea. It's like the Aquarian age. It's about, love and peace and, all that stuff, hippie stuff, That's the way people understand it, it's a good idea. But since they don't experience peace, they don't really know what it is. It's just a concept, right? It's the same thing as everything else we talk about here. Since you don't experience your true nature, now watch. Since you don't experience or you think you don't experience your true nature, because you actually do, right? But because you think you don't experience your true nature, right? You think that your true nature is something that you have to accomplish, or something that you have to change, right? To become that true nature. When in fact that true nature is already here and you are experiencing it. The only reason the only reason you're not aware that you're experiencing it, right, is because you're living in a dream. You're sleeping. You're sleeping. That's why you can't see things as they actually are. So what are we doing by practicing meditation? We're practicing waking up, practicing being peaceful. When you sit in meditation and you move your attention from the thought activity to the body breathing, there's peace there. There's peace there, because where there is no thinking, there's peace, right? Thinking breeds conflict, doesn't it? Thinking breeds conflict, because thinking is the source of your misunderstanding that you're a separate self. Thinking is the source of your misunderstanding that you're a physical body. Thinking is the source of your misunderstanding about your relationship to humanity and your relationship to your family and your relationship to yourself. Thinking is the source of all that, right? Now, the problem is we can't just throw thinking out, right? Thinking is necessary to function, right? So what has to happen is we have to be awake and aware of thinking so we can notice the thinking that doesn't work and stop participating in that. So what that means is you begin with formal meditation, you develop an understanding of what's happening when you're meditating, you understand what it offers you, you understand that this formal practice is only the beginning, and that's why you have to do it consistently over time so it can start to take effect, right? But once it starts to take effect, you've got to carry it to its conclusion, meaning that you've got to come out of formal meditation and start to practice it as a way of being in your life. As a way of being in your life. In other words, you have to maintain an awareness of being aware. You have to develop the ability to maintain an awareness of being aware. Why? So you can see what's going on, right? That seems like a no-brainer. So you can see what's going on. And you can see when what you're doing is you're buying into the illusion. You're buying into what the thinking generates, which is the idea that you're separate from other people, which is the idea that you have to survive when there's nothing to survive. You have to survive this idea that you have of yourself as a person that doesn't even exist, right? And you can see the effect of that when it's 100% the reality that a human being is living in. You can see how the effect of that when it's 100% the reality that a human being is living in, right? And when I say you can see the effect of that, what I'm pointing to are the people walking by in the hallway. You can look at any typical human being and see the effect of the mistake. You can look at any typical human being and see the effect of the mistake. Why? Because they will be acting in their own best interest. And they will be reacting to anything that disturbs what they want, right? They will be reacting to anything that seems to control them, right? Because the name of the game is to resist domination, isn't it? Yeah, be in control, dominate, and resist domination. So when you wake up, you understand that, you're at war. See, when you wake up, you understand that you're at war. Not the people on the other side of the world, you're at war. That just happens to be another expression of it, that's all. But if you look in your own life, it's no different than what's happening there. How many things do we do in our lives that are destructive, right? That's a bomb, isn't it? Yeah. If it's destructive, you drop bombs on your own world, right? You drop bombs on your own world. And then we're going to sit back and criticize what's happening over there? How can you? Do you understand? That's hypocrisy. Unless you experience peace and you understand peace and you know what the source of peace really is, you're being a hypocrite by saying people should be peaceful. Because you're not. But that's not even seen. Do you understand? That's not even seen. People are so 100% caught up in the way things look when it's not, the way things look from the nationalistic perspective, you see it as an American, They see it as a Ukrainian. They see it as a Russian, right? The problem is that's the problem, that everybody's seeing it from their own conditioning. And the conditioning is in conflict with each other. It's not you and me in conflict, it's our conditioning that's in conflict with each other. And it's our ongoing perpetuation of a state of ignorance in which we're unwilling to take responsibility for the truth. And if you are willing to take responsibility for the truth, the way you'll know that you are is you'll be paying attention to this first. Who am I being? How am I being? How much conflict is in my world? How much war is in my life? How much inner conflict do I experience, right? And the thing that's interesting about this is when you apply the definition of peace, it takes care of the whole thing. It takes care of the whole thing. The way the personality expresses itself, which is what you're referring to, right? The way the personality expresses itself is from the idea that it's separate from the rest of the world. The way the personality expresses itself is that way. And so of course it would be frustrating because you can't control everything, right? That's the way the personality expresses itself. the piece that passes understanding is that even when that personality is having those thoughts or having those emotions, it's held inside of the awareness. So the identification is not with that, it's with the truth. The identification is not with that, it's with the awareness. It's with God. It's not with you as a body-mind organism, right, that has been created and is expressing something coming through it from beyond it. No. It's being experienced in such a way where you're trying to understand something you can't understand, and you dumb it down and turn it into something that makes sense to you, and then continue to perpetuate the mess. It's funny in a way.